All right, welcome back. Happy New Year, everyone. um, let's see. So last time we met, I think it was only three of us,
Yeah.
right? We talked about jQuery. Um, so, uh, so some of you are not familiar with jQuery, but that's okay. We're gonna review only the bits and pieces that we might need as we need it. Let me start the server. Let's see if we still have that working. Let's see, localhost 3000. Okay, so this is the application we had been working before we left on the break. The reason we covered jQuery, well, other than jQuery on its own is a good technology to know, irrespective of whether you're doing Angular or doing anything else. jQuery on its own is a very useful technology on its own. But the specific reason why we started using it was because I wanted to introduce directives, right? Angular directives, and the idea of Angular directives is that we want to be able to create components, reusable components, very much like we do in other stacks, right? In Java or C#, or we're always looking to modularize, right? Make small modular, self-contained components that we can configure by turning on a few switches here and there, or passing certain properties or arguments, and it behaves any which way we want. All right. So let's create the simplest of these components. All right. Let's see. In my sandbox, I'm going to create a directory where we can play around with directives. So directives, and let's create our very first directive. Let's put it in a directory. We'll create a hello world directive. Yes. So create in a directory there. We'll just create a small index file where we can create our very first hello world directive. And so the idea is that yes, we can create dynamic content by having a controller, the controller providing data for some view, and the view using templates, right, to iterate over a collection or whatever and display dynamic content, right? That's all and good. But as we generate content, we might identify, ooh, this piece of view that we just rendered it's so useful, especially if you find it that you're using it in many different places, right? Maybe it's a list, or maybe it's a table, maybe it's some rendering that you identify that this is very useful. Instead of copying and pasting the code, the HTML, the controller, and everything over and over to render the same thing, would it be great if we could just make a component out of it, right? And maybe even give it a dedicated HTML tag that we could just paste the HTML tag, and you have that behavior, right? So that's where we want to go. And the first one that we're going to play around with it is a very simple hello, a brand new tag that doesn't exist. Right? Notice that this is it's not an HTML tag, right? It's my customized hello tag, right? That doesn't do anything other than just says hello world. So let's do a simple one first. First of all, this only works inside of an existing Angular application. Right? So let's create an Angular application, a very simple Angular application. For that, we'll need the script, right, and pull down Angular from a CDN. So let me do that real quick. Angular CDN. We'll get it from the from Google itself, from the source. So let me just copy that, and I'll paste it here. And there we have it. We have Angular installed on our page, and we're going to declare this to be an ng app, Angular application. We'll call it directive demo app. Right, so it's an application specifically for playing around with directives. All right. So along with declaring this to be a directive demo app, that we need to declare our own script that creates that module, right, with the same name. It's a directive demo app, right? What else? All right, so let's get started. Let's oh, I'm sorry, app.js. I'm sorry, app.js. In app.js, we're going to declare the directory demo app. All right, we're going to use the iffy design pattern, that function, and in here we're going to use Angular.module, and then the name of the application is directive demo app. No dependencies. All right. Let's if I navigate to the index page, all right, let's put an H1 saying directive demo app. If I navigate to this index page, we should see this H1. Yes. Let's do that. Let's navigate to localhost, sandbox. What is it? Directives, and then hello. It loads that index page and says directive demo app. See that? So we are at that page. But notice that my hello tag didn't do anything, right? As expected. Right? The browser is interpreting that tag and said, I don't know that tag. I don't know what to do with it. Okay, so we're going to take over that tag. Right? We're going to say it's going to be our responsibility what that tag does. Right? And that hello tag can invoke all sorts of behaviors that we would want. For now, we'll do it something trivial. We'll just say hello world. All right. So let's do that. Let's go to the app, and we're going to declare our very first dummy hello world directive. And the way we do that is by using the directive function, right, on a Angular module on an application that we create, right? Just like controllers, right? We declare it by name, right, and then we implement it with a constructor. Yes. The name of this directive has to match the tag, the element that we are taking over, right? So the tag is hello, and it matches with the name of the directive. Make sense? Okay. And then we are going to map it to a function that's going to implement the behavior of that directive. Right. So we'll map it to a hello dir, right? Function that we're going to implement here. Are we okay? Right. So hello dir is going to implement the behavior of that tag. Okay. For instance, the simplest thing that we could do is to replace the tag with some content, right? Like for instance, hello world. The way it works is that this function, this constructor, needs to return a configuration object, right? A configuration object that the infrastructure will use to be able to interact with this tag. All right. So the simplest configuration object that we could possibly return is just a template, some HTML template, right? That will be used to replace the content of that hello tag, right? You can say replace or use the following HTML, right, to render that tag. So we could say just hello world. Okay, that's the simplest behavior that we could do. Right, so if we go back and we re-render, notice that it says hello world now. See that? Okay. If we look at the content, notice that the hello tags are still there. It's part of the DOM, right? But whatever appears inside is whatever we return in the template, right? So if we instead want to put some formatting in there, right? We could re-render and notice that inside of the hello tag, right, we have the h1 hello world. Make sense? Right, this is the simplest of things that we could possibly do. Any questions? Right. Obviously, we could put some more things here, some logic, some functions, some iterations, some all sorts of things, right? Connect to databases and all sorts of things that we want to. Right now, it's just the simplest of things. Make sense? All right. All right, let's keep going. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to create yet another one. All right, so I'm going to say hello, but I'm going to add this hello world. All right. So it's going to be exactly the same example, but I'm going to make one change, right? One very small change that would allow me to talk about something very important. Now, in the HTML world, the naming conventions is that it's case insensitive. So HTML is case insensitive. So it doesn't matter if you use capital, lowercase, combination, camel casing. But in the JavaScript world, we are case sensitive, right? So we need to reconcile these two worlds because they're going to be talking to one another, right? And now we just came up with a mechanism by which we can map. We can map tags or names in an HTML world. We can map them to names in the JavaScript world, right? But they have very different naming conventions in both worlds. One of them is case insensitive. The other one is case sensitive. So, for instance, if I have a tag that has a complex name, typically the naming convention is that you use dashes, right? So, for instance, you would say "Hello World" if it's two words, yes. But in JavaScript, dashes are not valid in the name, right? So we could not use this name in JavaScript. Okay. So if I go to the app here, okay, and I want to map it to something. This, as I said earlier, right? This name maps to the tag name on an HTML. But again, the naming conventions are not. So here, instead of using dash, which would be the normal thing that you would expect, right?
This won't work, you're saying?
This won't work.
Can we try?
Right? Yeah. And hello. Yeah, it doesn't render.
Okay.
Okay, so the tag is there, hello world, but it's empty. There's nothing in it. Okay. So the naming convention is that in JavaScript you use camel casing instead, right? For naming things, it's the first word is lowercase, and all words after that are capitalized, right? First letter capitalized. So this is the naming convention that we would use to name things in the JavaScript world, right? So there is a conversion between the naming convention on one and the other, following the rule that capitals, like this capital W, maps to dash W lowercase. Yes? That is the convention, right? If we do that and refresh, notice that it works again. Right? Everybody okay? Just wanted to point that out. All right.
So who does that conversion? Angular?
The Angular framework. The Angular framework, following that naming convention, normalizes. It's called normalizing the names. It normalizes it following that rule. Everybody okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right. So let's copy this again.
Shut this off.
Oh.
You just remove the USB.
Oh. There we go. It's still trying to. How do I kill it? Stop it.
There's a pause button, right?
Is there?
I don't see it.
I'm clicking it.
Yeah, you clicked it.
Oh.
Yeah.
The X,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
All right, so let's keep going. So I'm going to paste it here. I'm going to create yet another directive. Right? Just slowly getting a little more complex. Okay. All right. So the hello world right now is static, right? It's rendering just some static content. We want it to be able to communicate with the outside world, so the outside world can provide it data from outside, right? And then the directive can be aware of its context, the context that it exists. Right? So let me close this. Right, so in index, I'm going to generate here a list. A list. So I'm creating again another element of my own, and I want to populate it with content in there. All right. So what we could do is the only way that we know that we can generate any content is to have a anyone who can create a content is a controller. A controller could generate some context for anything that might be inside. Right. So let's create a very simple controller outside here. Right. Perhaps call it ng controller, and this is equal to a directive demo. Controller. Okay? And we'll have this controller provide some context data, right? And anybody inside of the scope of that controller should be able to see whatever data the controller generates, right? So if we go into the app, our new directive is called list. So let's change that. List directive. Right? And I've just created a brand new controller called, what was it? Directive demo controller. Oops. Right, and I'm going to implement it in a function of the same name. So here we have a controller, function of that name, and we're going to use scope. Okay? So the scope can generate content. Right? We could say $scope, and we can generate some data here. It says hello, hello world, right? And since the controller is assigning some data to some variable in the scope, it's certainly available anywhere inside of the scope of this controller, right? So if I say hello, right, we should see hello world in there. Yes?
Yeah.
Right? Everybody good? All right, so if we navigate to here, we could say list. Say list, there it is, right? There's a hello world generated by the controller, right? The controller is generating that, right? And so anything inside of the controller can see this global variable that is being declared outside, right? Including directives inside that were declared inside of the scope of the controller. So this one over here, we could say hello. See that? Right? These curly brackets, right? That will be resolved because someone already put that in the scope, right? So if I render this, notice that it still says hello world, right? So if the controller says something else, goodbye world, that's sad. Right? Notice that it changes, right, in the context of the controller as a template, right? But also as inside of the template that is being rendered by the directive, right? So the directive sees that. To make this a little more interesting, let's perhaps instead of just a regular string, let's pass an array. Let's pass an array, right, of products, and the products might have names such as R180. Might have a name DTM, and name S44. Yes,
Mhm.
right. So when it gets rendered, the controller we could say products, right? That should render that array, right? If I render it, notice that indeed the controller does render, the view does render that, right? But notice that the template, the directive didn't render anything because it's trying to render what? It's trying to render
You said hello there.
hello, right? And hello is not bound to anything anymore, right? But we could, just render the products here, right? Products, right? So notice that also the directive sees the data that is being declared in the outside scope. Everybody okay?
So if the hello wasn't bound, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did it show an exclamation?
It was hard coded in there. It had
Just
brackets.
hello.
Yeah, no, it had it was like that. It had the exclamation.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
So products, yes.
So can like each app.js have multiple directives?
Yeah, typically what you do is you create a separate module, and in that module you declare tons of directives, right? And then anyone who wants to use those, any other module, maybe like a top-level module, can then declare dependency. It says, I depend on that other module that has all the directives, right? And now all those directives would be available to any module who includes that module as a dependency.
So you
Right.
pass it in the angular brackets, right?
Yeah,
Right, that's
exactly.
empty, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right now we're declaring directives right on this module. So this module, the directive demo app, has a directive declared on that module. Right? We could have instead declared it in a separate module, and then this module can declare that other module as a dependency.
So HMH, Teacher Center also uses.
Yes, yes, yeah. We slowly we have been replacing a lot of our content with
Directives.
directives. Yeah, has been a big effort at modularizing things so that we can make them reusable. Yeah.
This is where? SendClient or DB?
Both.
Both?
Oh, yeah.
So does this, this new tags will that get failed on the W3C validator things? Like, so the validation, some standard used for the naming the tag conversion?
Yes, very important. Thank you for mentioning it. A good practice is to namespace all these directives,
Okay.
right? So that we don't confuse them with actual tags,
Right,
right?
okay.
Or we don't inadvertently use a tag name that's actually a real tag, right? Or we override somebody else's tag. So
what
for
happens
instance,
if you do that? If you say H1 over
this
here?
one takes over. You are redefining.
H1, oh, okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you're redefining whatever it says, right? So to avoid that, for instance, we prepend things with with an HMH in front of it, right? And so the tag here of this would be HMH. HMH list, right? So same thing with CSS. Any classes that we declare,
Mm-hmm.
right? We prepend them with HMH dash something, right? So that we're not inadvertently overriding Bootstrap or any materials, classes that someone else does, right? And Angular, for instance, prepends all their attributes with ng dash. See that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? To make it clear that this is not a native attribute, right? It's being declared by the Angular. Okay.
So,
Yes.
So what I see is ngView also has a template where you're passing a code snippet.
Yes. Those are meant to be entire pages.
Okay.
Right. Those are meant to be entire pages. These are meant to be subsets, little bits and pieces that, like an element, right? Like an HTML tag, right? Maybe a table or list or some input field that you give it a behavior, right? Maybe you want to standardize how our validation happens with all our input fields, right? That it highlights this way, it gives a message down below, it pops up something. And we want to standardize that, right? So you would create your own HMH dash, instead of using input, you would create your own HMH input, right? Which has an input in there plus all the extra bells and whistles, right? And then you encapsulate all that behavior in that one tag. Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, in that case, in ngView, you use template URL to say it's an entire page that you're rendering, and that one page might include many little directives. Okay. All right.
So what are some examples in our code base?
Like when we render the resources, right?
Yeah.
The list of the resources is a directive, which includes each resource itself is a directive. That's one example. The overview in TE, that's an iteration of directives, right? That tells it how to, when you hover over, right, and all the bindings of the controller that provides all that from a service that provides it for it to render. All those are directives. Yeah, yeah, we're heavily doing that, and this is good because when we move to Angular 2, Angular 2 is all components. It's all heavily just components, right? Which is good. By learning directives, it'll make it easier to transition to Angular 2. All right. All right. Let's see. This still works. Did we break anything? All right. Okay. So let's go back to this list. The name list suggests that this is a list of something, right? So we could say that the template is a UL, right? An actual list, yes, of line items, right? And presumably I want to iterate over certain things, yes. So I'm going to iterate over using ng repeat, right? I want to repeat of product in the products, right? And I want to display in here the product.name. See that? Let's see, did I add that correctly? Yes. Right, so that's an actual list, right? Iterating over a collection of things that is being defined by some controller outside. Yes? Right? And if we refresh that, notice that it renders as a list. Yes? And that's wonderful. This has one big problem though. Okay? It depends on a variable that is being declared by an outside context. Right? This only works if the outside controller declares a variable called products. Yes? And that dependency is a bad practice. We want to make this self-contained so that it doesn't depend on an outside context. Instead, what we want to do is provide an API. Right? If you want me to render something dynamically, pass it to me in a well-defined API, right? And then internally, I can call it whatever I want. I don't have to depend on global variables or side effects of other contexts defining certain things. Yes. So let's refactor this. Let's refactor this list. List. I'll call it list scope. Let's close all. Let's reopen this and let's rewrite this. Let's rewrite this so that instead of HMH list depending on an outside scope, we'll create an API, right? And the API for attributes an API for a tag. The way you configure things or the way you talk to things is through attributes, right? So, for instance, you can say items, right? And then you want to pass an argument here, right? You want to pass some data, right? And in this case, we want to pass the products, okay? So this is like a function providing some parameters that you can pass the arguments, and then inside the function is opaque, right? It can do whatever it wants with its arguments, right? You're using the the information hiding policy, right? So now this directive, instead of seeing this product, I don't want to depend on the outside products. Internally, I want to receive this as an argument and then use it internally using my own naming conventions. Make sense? Right? So to do that, this configuration object can define yet another thing and say, I want to declare my own scope. I want to declare how I interact with the outside world that has its own scope, right? So that I can name things any which way I want internally. Okay, so I can say in the outside world there is an attribute called items that I want to add it to my own internal scope, right? Just like the controller has a scope, yes. The directive also has a smaller scope, right? Which by the scoping rules, smaller scope can see the larger scope, but not the other way around, right? Larger scopes can't see the inner scopes. That's a very common policy, right? So I like to be able to map things that are outside of the outer scope into my local scope, right? And the way we do that is by using this scope configuration, right? What we're going to say is that internally, I want to call it my collection. Internally, I want to call it the collection. And outside, it's called, what's it called? It's called items, the attribute, right? The attribute is called items, right? So, equal items. Equal items. So internally, I have mapped something that is declared outside and into something that I'm going to call locally. My local scope is going to be called collection, right? So now, internally, I can say this is a collection. It's a collection, right? I don't know that these are products. I have no idea that these are products. I can say that these are items, right? An item in the collection, right? And then declare the item .name. Okay. So internally, I'm free to call it. I'm no longer dependent on things that are declared outside because I have this API, right? So if I re-render this list, what is it? List scope. Notice that it works the same way, right? It behaves exactly the same way as before, but using a good practice, right, of not depending on the outside code. We depend on something that you pass me, the argument, right? And that's where the interface happens. Are we okay?
So is this a keyword like scope, collection?
Yes, scope is, so these are the various things that you can configure. You can configure the HTML that I'm going to be using. You can configure the mapping between my local scope and the outside scope. Okay, so internally I'm going to call it this other thing. If I want to use exactly the same name, items, internally, if I say that this is also internally, I am going to use items. Okay, and this is also called items. All right, this would work the same way. It would still work. But notice that these items and items, it has the same name. See that? It's kind of redundant, right? If the outside attribute is called exactly the same way as the scope variable I'm declaring locally, there's a shortcut, and you can just say equals. Right? Equals means they're called the same. It's an attribute that is called the same way that I'm calling it locally, right? So I don't have to explicitly tell you the name, right? If the names are different, then you have to explicitly tell me what are the names.
How would if the names are same as products? Item is product.
So this
Will it get confused?
this maps to whatever I called it in the attribute. Okay?
Yeah.
And the idea is not to use the outside names.
Okay.
Right? Otherwise, they're not dependent on whatever they call it from outside. Okay. All right. Everybody still with me? All right.
Why is it a good practice? I mean, what's the harm in not doing
Well,
it?
it's the same thing as when you're creating a class. A class is a container of functionalities, and each function it has its own API, right?
Oh,
And internally, each function has its own local scope
Mhm.
that is not visible from outside.
right.
So you call this function, you pass the parameters. The function declares what the names of the variables are, right, and does the mapping of the arguments that you pass in, and it names them using local variables, right? And that's a typical policy of creating a barrier, right? A well determined API that says, hey, internally, what I do in the function is none of your business. I can call things any which way I want. So I'm not dependent on global variables being declared outside, right?
Yep.
It's only exclusively through the API that we can talk to each
Yeah,
other.
which is kind
So
of
same thing here.
Which is kind of absurd because in the first place you have a global variable called $scope, right? Which is again a bad practice.
Which you shouldn't do anyway, right? Yep.
So then, how would you have the view also publish what's in your controller? I mean,
You pass it as an argument. So like this, right? But well, I mean, we're discussing things from the point of view of the directive, right?
Yeah.
Where
Right. But I know what you're saying, but I'm just saying that
Yep.
in the first place you're making this mistake.
Right, exactly. You wouldn't do that.
How would you then do it?
Typically, what you would do is instead of using scope, I think we talked about this. Var, you would say var a VM. You would tie it to the any data. You would tie it to the instance of the controller,
Uh-huh.
right? So that it would be scoped at the instance of the controller,
Okay.
right? Instead as scopes.
And then this will work now?
No, you would have to tie it. You would say VM dot products, and then you would say as model, and then you should be able to say model dot products. Let's see if I broke this. Still works. Yeah.
But the top one.
Notice that the scope is no longer there. There is no scope.
Oh, I see.
There is no scope.
Is
It's
that
only tied. That's a best practice, and that's the way we do it in our development. We tie it to the instance of the controller as opposed to this kind of global scope. The problem of tying it to the scope is that if you have nested scopes, you don't really know if you declare a variable, you don't really know which scope does it belong to.
Right.
Right. So it's better that it's tied to a particular controller, so you know exactly who is responsible for that variable. Right. Who is declaring that variable? Right. So that you can trace it back to which controller is providing that data, as opposed to just littering the scope with tons of stuff, right?
Oh,
And sometimes overriding each other,
right.
right? One variable overriding, because you didn't know it was called that way.
Yeah.
But if you namespace it with a controller, then
Can I see the code again?
yeah, the namespacing happens here, right? I'm calling this controller locally as model, right? So that variable is no longer in the scope; it's tied to that one controller instance.
Oh,
Yeah, that's also a very good common practice.
and then you
So
say
this no
VM
longer
is
exists. This no longer exists.
Right.
There's nothing
Because
on
you
the
never
scope.
tied products.
I never put something in the scope. Yeah,
So,
that's a very common best practice that we do in our code. Yes.
so can we have more than one scope value?
Yeah, each controller can have its own scope.
No, you're talking about
the-
nested scopes.
Yeah, on the directive level.
Yeah.
No, the directive you have just the internal scope, but you can view the outside scope. You have you can, but it's a bad practice to access it, right? Even though it's there. Anything that you declare in the outside scope is available inside of the directive,
Yeah.
but it's commonly a bad practice to access it, right? I've seen certain examples in our code that do happen, especially in the TE, and Jerry has been very adamant about some of these practices not, and so he's refactoring a lot of these things and fixing it.
So in the scope we have this item
Yep.
that you created, and which is like it's an array or a JSON. So can
Yep.
I have another variable as well over there?
In where? In the scope? Here?
Yes.
Yeah, you can have any number of things that you can pass around. For instance, let's pass color. Okay, and so that means I'm going to tie it to something that is has the same name, right? And here, for instance, we might say color, right? And we can pass something here, right? Now, if I say red, what's going to happen here? It's going to look for a variable called red on the scope, right? It's gonna just remember when before we were saying product.
Yeah.
We were using product before. Remember that?
Yeah.
And the behavior is look for a variable called products on the scope. That's the default behavior, right? So same thing here, right? If I say red, right, the default behavior is look for a variable called red on the scope, right? And whatever that is going to be tied to this color here, right? If we render this, I think it's going to complain. See? I guess it didn't complain. But
No, if it doesn't find it, it'll do
yeah, if it doesn't find it, yeah, that's right. That's right. What we want to do is say let's use this color and let's use it to style this, right? We can say style is equal to color and then color. Yes, right. If we render this and we try to look at we try to inspect this. Notice that color colon is empty. See that? Nothing seems to be, because the red variable is undefined, right? Nobody has bound anything on it, right?
Where is oh yeah, color.
Right. The controller could perhaps put something in there, right? We could say vm.color, right, equals red or green. That'll be funny, right? And in the HTML, we could say model dot red. Oh, wait a minute. Not, why isn't that fancy? I'm sorry? Yeah, but it didn't render. Why didn't it render? Model dot red. Let me check to see, make sure that this is actually rendering. That it's actually has a value. Model.red. Did I call it red? Oh, VM color. I'm sorry. VM red is equal to green. There we go. Try it again. There it is. Right. It says the value is green. And notice that this looks greenish. See that? And you'll notice, right? You'll notice that there it is. See color colon green. It was passed as an argument, right? So the point I was trying to make is that whatever you put in here is going to want to be evaluated as a variable, as a reference to something. Yes, right? If you want to pass a literal string, you would have to do something like the string red. See that? The string red. So if I render that, notice that it's red now. See that? Right, because this color here, right, is being bound now to the actual string red. That makes sense, right? If you know,
But it's still showing green on the model.red.
yeah, because I was playing around. I was being silly. I was assigning green to red. And anyway, we're not using this variable.
No,
anyway.
you're passing red.
I'm sorry.
You passed red.
Yes, but it's a string now, right? It's a literal string.
Okay.
It's a literal string.
Yeah. So VM.
That is when the page loads.
Yeah, when the page loads.
Green. First time it's green, right?
No.
Yeah, I'm not using this anymore. I'm not using
No.
this
Keep
anymore.
that in. That's what is confusing me.
Oh,
because
okay. I'm
it's-
sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So now you're passing a literal red. Go to your JavaScript.
Yep.
So when this happens, vm.red is equal to
Green.
hard-coded green.
So this renders green.
Green.
And notice that I'm not using it at all here. I'm just passing a literal string.
Different string.
Yeah.
a completely different string,
Yeah.
right, which is the red string.
And then how does it become red? The style become red.
Then we say that gets mapped to color,
Yeah.
and then we style it color with
But-
color right here.
This
I'm
can-
not using this at all.
Yeah, oh,
I'm
yeah,
not
yeah,
using this
oh,
at all.
okay,
Different
got it,
variable,
got it,
even
got
though
it.
Yeah, it's a different variable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Did
Yeah.
I confuse you?
Yeah.
So actually you could confuse folks with creating a tag, an element that gives the expectations of certain behaviors, right? And then it behaves completely differently,
Yeah.
right? Imagine redefining in C you could do this, right? Redefine plus so that it behaves like minus, right? And then screw everybody up every time they use plus. It behaves differently, right?
Yeah.
Same thing here. Just like C++ allows you to redefine functions or redefine the way parentheses works or the equal signs works. Here too, you can redefine the whole entire HTML language. You don't like the way div behaves or body, you can redefine everything. Okay, you can make your own HTML language. Anyway, that was so the point I was trying to make also is that if you know that this here, right, should be interpreted literally as opposed to evaluated,
Mm-hmm.
meaning if you don't want to always have to pass this quote, right, you wanted to interpret it as a literal as opposed to as a variable, right, you can do that. You can tell the scope, instead of putting equal, right, you can say at. Right? At means do not reinterpret this. Right? Do not try to evaluate the variable. I am expecting it as a literal. Right? So now I no longer need the quote in front of it, meaning this is going to be interpreted as the literal string red. Okay? So that it say let's change this to blue. And now it's blue. Okay. Everybody okay? Everybody still with me? All right. All right, let's keep going. Now, if you find yourself that you're passing lots and lots and lots of these just as literal attributes, right? There's a better way to do it throughout instead of using scope. There's a much more convenient way of doing it as opposed to doing it this way, right, which I'll show you in a minute. Right? But if you're passing variables like items, like object references, the way you do it is through the scope. Okay. But if you're passing lots and lots of just little strings, right, there's a much better way of doing it, which we'll show in a minute. But everybody still okay with me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So actually, there's instead of using this template, right? It's actually a fairly inconvenience to have this template variable and have this quote, right? Defining this HTML in a single line, right? So there are better ways of doing this. One of them is the following. I'll show you in a minute. Is copy, paste, so list, template, function. Okay, let's close this whole thing. Let's close all. So instead of declaring this as a single line, right? What we could do is that we could replace this with a function, right? That could do a lot of more things. Maybe connect to a service, connect to and go fetch some data from a database, right? And render this dynamically, right? That would be much better. So instead of declaring it here, I'm going to remove this from here, right? And I'm going to declare a template function, okay? Which I am free to do more things, more complicated things, right? So function, template function, okay? And then I can say that var, the HTML, is that string, okay? Is that string.
My screen is not painted.
Oh wow.
You didn't see it.
You didn't see that? Did I stop sharing somehow?
No, I think it's what happened. I don't know, but it was working for so long.
Oh, look, I'm not sharing anymore.
Oh,
No, it's not sharing.
Yeah,
the
let's
recording
see.
is also closed.
No, recording is recording.
Oh.
No, it's recording. But let me see what's going on. Desktop, not share, hide stage, desktop, share now. All right, can you see again?
Where is painting? No, yeah.
Can you see it again?
Yeah.
All right, so notice that in my function now, I'm free to do more complex things. Maybe I can put this in a for loop. I can put this whiles. I can go talk to a database, right, using a service and do all sorts of more complicated things. As long as this just returns the calculated HTML, okay, that's the contract, right? This function needs to return a render, some HTML. However I created it, it's up to you, right? But the function needs to return it. So let's try and render this now. This list, what's it called? List template function. List template function. Notice that it still behaves the same way, right? Still behaves the same way. Now, one of the arguments, this function, when it gets invoked, gets past certain arguments, right? With this the infrastructure, when it invokes this function, it passes certain things that allow it to connect to the outside world. One of them is the scope variable, which is this scope right here. This scope variable, right? Another thing that gets passed here is the element. Okay, this element is the jQuery, right, reference to the original. Oops, where is it? Sorry, public, sandbox, directives. The original HTML tag, right?
Stop sharing again.
Again?
What? See it.
You can see it, Philip?
Seems I can see.
You can see? You see my mouse?
No,
No, it stopped.
It's gone now.
What's going on?
Microsoft.
What the heck? Okay, now it's sharing.
Yeah, it says gone. Yep.
You can see it now?
Yep, I'm seeing.
Yeah, now I can see.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
So yeah, so it gets past this scope. Let's do a console log scope, right? And let's also print the element. Okay. So if we refresh this, right? If we look at the console here and refresh, notice that it passes us at line 10. That's what line is that? Line 10. These two lines, line 10 and over here, this element. It passes us. Oh, wait a minute. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it passes. Sorry, not the scope. It doesn't pass the scope. It passes the elements and the attributes. Right. So let me print out the element and print out the attributes. Attributes with an S. Attributes. Okay. If we refresh, notice what it is. Right. The first argument, this element argument, is the jQuery representation of the element. So notice if I hover over it, notice that it highlights it on the left hand side. See that? It highlights it on the left hand side.
Stop.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh man, what the heck? It highlights the. It's supposed to be highlighting the jQuery. Yeah, let me try that.
Back up here. Yeah.
Now you can see?
Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully that
Well,
will.
this is much better. I
Okay.
can see it move in real time.
So I was saying it passes two arguments. One of them represents the jQuery object, right? That you can manipulate. You can do all sorts of things with that object. If you remember from before we left, right? jQuery allows you to dynamically add content, dynamically manipulate the style, programmatically do all these things, right? It also passes attributes, right? It passes the list of all the attributes. If you'll see in the console, look at the attributes. Notice that color is there. See that? Right, the color attribute is there. The items is there. But notice that they're interpreted not as variables, but they're interpreted as little strings. See that? Right, so the attribute, this is a better way of passing just little strings, right, over to the directive, as opposed to using the scope. The scope allows you to pass variables, full-blown objects, arrays, objects, and whatnot, references to the outside world. Attributes is just for passing just static or little strings, right?
So-
Notice that the color is there, items is there, but interpreted as little strings. Okay?
So what I got confused is, go back to your code.
Yep.
So before this, you called the function without any attributes and it worked, right?
Yes, right.
So
exactly.
why? So I'm confused. Are you injecting it now?
No. In JavaScript,
Yeah.
the functions
Yeah.
are you can have as many arguments as you have. You can have a dynamic list of arguments, right? And they don't necessarily have to have the same name, a number of attributes, right? So if you only ask for the first attribute,
Yeah.
you will be passed that first attribute. If you could receive more attributes, you could also receive
But
more.
is the order
The order matters, yes.
matters?
Yeah, there's no injection here. This is not injection. This is just plain old JavaScript, the way it behaves.
So this template function is a reserved word again, right?
No, I'm calling it template function. I could call it whatever I want.
But where is it defined?
Right here.
No. I get that. But here you're just saying this function.
Yes.
And then what if I give foo over here? Give foo. Comma foo.
Yeah, that's foo. That's fine.
Yeah.
No, screen not share.
Yeah, screen is not shared.
It's okay.
Huh?
It's okay. I can use that. I can do that. There's no injection here. There's no injection here.
So what? How
So
does it know? How does it know it's an element? How is it interpreting this?
What it's going to do is going to pass you an object that is a jQuery representation of the original HTML.
Who's doing this for me?
The infrastructure says, I'm going to look at the template.
Yeah.
This is reserved.
Yeah.
It has to be called template.
Okay.
Whatever you pass it has to be a function. It doesn't matter the name.
Yeah.
It will use that function to pass you
Mhm.
two things,
Uh-huh.
right? The first one will be a jQuery object
Mhm.
representing the original HTML. You can call it whatever you want internally. The second argument will be the list of all the attributes, right, parsed from the original HTML.
Mhm.
You can call internally whatever you call it, right, whatever you want. But JavaScript, that's a standard JavaScript behavior. Functions in JavaScript are treated like first order
Okay, give it a
objects.
third argument. Say foo2.
It's not going to pass me anything. It will be undefined.
Oh, so
It doesn't care. It's undefined. Well, maybe it does pass something. I don't remember. It's undefined. Yeah, it's not passing anything for it.
so is Angular doing this for you for us?
Angular Angular just knows that it takes your object.
Yeah.
It will call
Mm-hmm.
whatever function you give it
Mm-hmm.
here, configure here in the template,
And
and it will pass two arguments. That's the contract. That's the contract. Internally, you can call your functions whatever you want, right? Because Angular calls that function whatever it wants,
Mhm.
right? And it will call it by using its name, parentheses,
Yeah.
calling it with two things.
This looks like injection to me.
Okay. No, it's not injection. It's just plain old. Injection would be that this would be a reserved name, and I can call it by name, right? And it's something available anywhere, right? This is only available as a contract between us two. This is only available within this context.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a somewhat disturbing syntax in JavaScript.
Yeah, because in order to invoke a function in Java,
Yeah.
we look at the contract, right?
Yeah.
Function name has to be the same, and
Yeah.
the
Yeah, there's no
arguments have
such
to
thing
be
as
there.
interfaces in
And then you do-
JavaScript.
okay.
In JavaScript, there's no such thing as an interface.
Yeah.
The way we understand it,
Yeah.
interfaces are only
So where is the
by convention.
So where is it documented that it passes two arguments?
Angular documents. It's saying I will pass you these two arguments. The first one will be this, and the other one will be that.
Okay.
And since JavaScript, the data types are dynamic.
Yeah.
Right? There's no way for me to actually test
Mhm.
that this indeed is the jQuery.
Mhm.
There's no validation whatsoever, right? Because JavaScript is weakly typed,
Mhm.
right? It will not do any validation,
I
right?
see. Your screen share stopped again.
Okay, let me share again.
You want to drop off and come back, join in? I don't know why it's dropping so frequently.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Right, if it happens again, I'll just drop and rejoin.
Okay.
So this is still working. It hasn't broken. But the point I was trying to make is that instead of using this color in the scope, right, a better approach is to just use the attribute in here. Okay, so we can say instead of this color here, right, we can oops, sorry. Foo.color. Okay.
Why don't you rename the function again?
Oh, okay. Yeah, a lot of the things work in JavaScript because of convention, right? And some folks, obviously coming from C# or from Java, find that very disturbing. That there's no validation whatsoever. It's all by convention. That's going to be fixed when TypeScript, when we start working with using TypeScript. TypeScript, you have a choice to be weakly typed or strongly typed. And there is validation there, right? At compile time as opposed to at runtime. That's one of the problems in JavaScript. You only know if you're doing it correctly at runtime, right? Which might be too late, right? You want to catch these things early, right?
Oops, failed again.
All right, I'm gonna just quit out of here.
Yeah, control here.
TypeScript is developed by
Microsoft.
Microsoft, yeah.
really?
Yeah. So Microsoft.
Developed by one employee of Premier City.
No.
No.
Well, maybe they worked for them before.
Who are you
Maybe
talking
I don't know, but
Well, I'll figure out. Yeah.
What's his name?
How?
No, it's a Microsoft tool.
Okay.
Yeah.
maybe they purchased it. I don't know.
Unless he works for Microsoft.
Originally, that guy worked for that city, but later on he left because a lot of stuff on that city.
Okay, there we go. Attributes, right? And no ASDF. All right, so let's refresh this. Where were we? Okay, and it behaves the same way, right? So it's a better solution, right? If you are just passing around strings, you're not literally the scope, right? And it's scope within the attributes. Okay, everybody good? All right. Excuse me. All right, so let's take this a little further. Let's take this a little further. Oftentimes, directives. We've been looking at directives as implemented as elements, HTML elements. Yes, but actually, you can declare directives also as attributes. Okay, like over here, like this ng controller, right? See that? That's directives, right? That's one of the out-of-the-box directives defined by the Angular framework. You can define your own attributes too, right? And then tie behavior to that attribute. Okay. And then you can maybe combine all sorts of different attributes to add behavior, right, to an element. So let's play around with that a little bit. First of all, let's play around with. Are you serious? Must be my machine. Something wrong with my machine?
It booted me out though. Link is not reliable.
So,
Can
do
we,
you have a join me? Do you have a join me? Like,
how about Google Hangout? Anybody has Google Hangout? No? Gmail? No?
Skype.
Yeah, but Skype, I don't think it'll let us join more than 2. But you have Gmail, right?
The
Everybody
Skype will allow you.
yeah, Skype will allow.
More than 2?
Yeah.
Multiple.
Really?
So everybody is on Skype.
Okay, let's do a Skype call then.
So we can chat, get a chat. Like,
Well, Skype is a Microsoft product, isn't that right?
Going from frying pan to the fire.
We create a group here.
there's something like,
Are you creating a group?
yeah, you can say.
You wanna call everyone?
Yeah, I'll do that.
It's taking a while to come up. Come on. Okay, there we go.
So, everything is same. So let's call on the button.
Share the script.
Already just mute the mic and
Where? Let's try.
It's
I
on
think
your
it's.
phone.
I'm receiving it here.
Why isn't it coming here?
Why is it not shown?
uh,
Can you try to call me again? Oh, there it is. I got it.
Function.
Yeah.
Join
so-
call.
Function.
mute the speaker. Now you can click on the plus.
Plus share screen. Start. Can you all see? I'm gonna mute myself.
Yeah.
Can you all see?
Yeah.
All right. All right. So let's do yet another one, and we'll do a lorem ipsum. No, actually, let's do jQuery append example. Oh wait, I think let me copy this. Copy and then paste. It'll be jQuery append. All right, so let's create a very simple directive. I'll call it lorem ipsum. Right? And as you all know, lorem ipsum it just gives you some random piece of snippet of code, right? So let's implement that, and we'll call it here will be lorem ipsum, and implement it in a directory in a directive of the same name. Okay, and what we're going to do is instead of using a template, there is yet another way of doing this, which is the preferred way. Right, the preferred way is to use what it's called the link function. The link function, what it does is that instead of you dynamically rendering these things, of calling the function and regenerating the script, regenerating the string, right, and recompiling it every time, right, instead it gets compiled just once, right, and then it gets cached by the infrastructure and then just reused every time every time the tag is used, right? So you can do it one or the other, right? If it's just once, you can just use the template, right? But if it's meant to be used maybe like in an iteration, like in a loop where you're iterating a whole bunch of them, a better approach is to use the link function instead. So it gets compiled once and then just copied and pasted all a bunch of times. So to do that, we use instead the link, right? Link is we're going to call the link function over here, right? By the time it gets to the link function, the HTML has already been compiled, right? You can manipulate it, you can keep manipulating it, right? But it's much more efficient, right? So let's create the function and create the link function, right? So by the time it gets here, now we do have a scope. It passes also the current element, a jQuery representation of the object, so you can manipulate it. You also get the attributes, right? And so, for instance, what I wanted to show you is that using that element, because it's a jQuery object, you can use all the jQuery functionality that we looked at a couple weeks ago. One of them is the append function. If you remember from a couple weeks ago, append allows you to add new content dynamically to whatever DOM element you might have. Here, what we're going to do is just we're going to append a lorem ipsum content.
So
let me
I
go.
forgot to ask you. So, which part of the DOM will I get? From where to where will I get?
The opening tag,
Uh-huh.
the opening tag of that directive. So here, right? You will get this, the opening this thing, only this. You will only get that, right? Okay. So let me grab some content here, lorem ipsum. So let me grab this text over here, and I'm going to paste it. And that's what I'm going to append dynamically. Notice that the original content, there is no content in there. See that?
Yeah.
Right. This element. Let me use double quotes. This element over here, it represents the jQuery interpretation of that DOM, right? And then you can manipulate it. You can change the colors. You can do append, but programmatically, right? So if we run this, this is jQuery append.
So element is basically $.
No, it's having applied $ to that, you get the resulting object. So $sign has been already applied to it. What you get is the actual object of having been applied the $sign, right? jQuery append, right? So there it is, lorem ipsum, right, is being rendered there. And every time I copy and paste lorem ipsum, right, I get more lorem ipsum, right, applied to it. Yes? Right? Internally, I can change some behaviors. For instance, I can say element.css. I can change this to display as in block. Display, and say I want to display this as in block as opposed to display this as inline. So I can render this, and now notice that now it's like divs. See that?
It doesn't look block to me. Is it block?
Yeah, it is block, right? Otherwise, without this, right? Notice that it just flows one into another.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
See that? So it behaves inline. That's the default behavior, inline, unless you specifically change that. Plus, I can change some other couple things, elements.css, to say that I want some margin bottom to be 10 pixels. Right? So I want to add some. I'm doing this programmatically. Obviously, you could do it with CSS, right? Instead, but I'm just showing you that you can programmatically do these kinds of things. Everybody okay? All right.
So how does the performance wise, what's
Ideally, you would do this in CSS. Right?
Okay.
You can't beat the browser on styling things.
Okay.
You would only do it when you absolutely need to do it programmatically, as a result of computing something.
Oh,
Right.
okay. Okay.
And then maybe as you click it, it's now selected,
Okay.
right?
So the
And then
best
you
practice-
unselect it, and then you can programmatically do that. And even then, what you might want to do is programmatically change the class,
Okay.
right? And then that would trigger the browser
To just
says,
change the-
okay, I'll apply the styles for that class.
Okay. Okay.
Right? That's even faster than you programmatically setting each one of the attributes.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't beat the browser on those. It's
So-
optimized for those kinds of
Yeah.
things.
So you basically just use the JavaScript logic to switch the.
Right. You would say something. You would say element add class.
Right.
Something like block
Mhm.
whatever. Right.
So the block will be defined on that.
So you're applying the class dynamically,
Okay.
but then the browser takes over and applies all the rules, the CSS rules
Right.
that are associated with that class.
Okay.
Right. Okay. I'm sorry.
I have to go.
Oh, okay. You have a meeting?
Yeah, I have to meet that. Then Okay.
Right. All right, then let's stop here. We can keep
Oh,
playing
okay.
around some more
Yeah.
next week.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. Yeah.
Actually, this is a good stopping place.
Yeah. That's
All right.
awesome.
All right, let me stop rendering. Okay, recording this.